Hey guys, in this lesson, we begin our unit on community and ecosystem interaction. So community and ecosystem ecology. Our first lesson today in this video is going to be about interspecific interactions. That is, between, right? So an interstate goes between states. Specific for species. So these are interactions between species. This lesson is going to be broken into two different videos with a brief a brief portion of another video, kind of a classic documentary in the middle. And so let's begin our conversation about interspecific interactions. In our very first lesson together, I talked to you guys about the zone of tolerance. I showed you this image right here, in which on the x-axis there is a range of physical or chemical conditions, right? So maybe temperature, really cold, really hot, and on the y-axis, the number of animals in a population. And so what we can see is, of course, at a particular range of temperatures in this case, the most steelhead trout are able to live. And as the temperature gets really hot or it gets really cold, you see fewer and fewer of these animals able to survive. And there is a zone of intolerance on either end of that spectrum as well. And so this is a concept that we have played with throughout this semester. Today, we're going to expand on this and not just look at one individual characteristic, but many conditions under which these organisms are able to live. And so collectively, all of the different conditions under which a species can live is called the ecological niche or niche, depending on your own personal preference. Both are totally okay. And so an ecologist Hutchinson expanded this concept of zone of tolerance to this multi-dimensional hypervolume. And so essentially looking at not just one condition, but many conditions. And so if we take this curve here, right, so this range, the zone of tolerance for temperature, for example, we can say that essentially this range right here is the range or zone of tolerance. We can also consider salinity, right? So now on the y-axis, we have like no salt versus lots of salt, and we can imagine that there is another curve, right, another distribution here, in which this would be the zone of tolerance according to salinity. And so if we extend up this range and extend out the salinity range, essentially we have a box in the middle here. And so this box would essentially represent the ecological niche for both temperature and salinity, right? So these are more of the conditions under which the animal can live. Okay. In reality, ecological niches are multi-dimensional, right? So not just two-dimensional, but multi-dimensional. Many different factors come into play. And so we can just keep on expanding this, so temperature, salinity, and even add pH. And so that gives us a cube essentially, and we can add more dimensions onto that. We're not going to go any farther than 3 dimensions, but I do want to point out that this is called the fundamental or physiological niche. So many different factors considered under all of these different these conditions is where the organism is able to survive. And so this is fundamental. It is hypothetically, given the adaptations, given the physiology of this organism, these are the conditions under which they live. However, when you consider more species, right? So if you're not looking at a fish in a fish tank, you're looking at a fish in a pond or in the ocean, they're going to be interacting with many other species, that is, having interspecific interactions. And so even though these are the conditions under which the steelhead trout can live, when they start to interact with other species, this fundamental niche cannot actually be realized. Okay, so if we consider this is species 1, the steelhead trout, and here is another fish species. These are their fundamental niches. However, we can see that there is an overlap between them, and this is very common, of course. And so because of this interaction, there's going to be competition in this part of the ranges of different conditions. And because of that, species 1, the steelhead trout, may stay to the outside of these conditions, and species 2 may stay to the outside of these conditions to eliminate as much competition as possible. So let's take a look at what that looks like. Here is species 1, species 2, hypothetical species, in the absence of the other guy, right? So only species 1, only species 2, each one living in their own fish tank under specific conditions. We can see that, this is the range. This is essentially the niche for species 1 and species 2, but there is a considerable overlap between conditions that both species are totally fine with using. If species 1 and species 2 are put in the same tank, or they're put in the same, lake, for example, what we can see here is that species 1 will essentially use this side of the resource gradient. So maybe, the lower pH range or something. This species uses the higher end of the range. And so ultimately, the resource utilization, when there is competition, when there are multiple species existing in the same place with overlapping fundamental niches, essentially the amount of resources they use, right? So the part of that zone of tolerance that they're actually utilizing is going to shift. And so this we can call the realized niche. Okay, so the realized niche, even though species 1 can use, these resources over here, it ultimately selects the other side of the range to minimize competition. Okay, so let's look at a real example here. This is a gradient on this, the side of a waterway. This is some marsh. And there are two different species of cattails. Okay, so there is T. latifolia and T. angustifolia. Okay, and the gradient here is water depth, right? So up out of the water and down into the water, right? And as we talked about earlier this semester, there are a lot of different things that have to go into surviving submerged in water all the time, as well as that saltiness in the water. Okay, so each species has its own zone or range of tolerance, its own physiological niche. Latifolia can survive in this range, angustifolia can survive in this range. And so in the absence of the other species, this, this line here is representing where these plants could actually survive. However, when they are living with the other population, the other species, we see that, both would be really competing in this area, right? So in this depth, this part of the range of conditions. And so when these populations are existing together, we see that latifolia generally takes the deeper water and angustifolia generally takes the higher part of the gradient. Okay, so the other way around. So angustifolia is deeper in the water here and latifolia is up on dry ground more of the time. Okay, so again, based on the physiology of the plant, both can live in a fairly wide range, but because angustifolia is able to live in deeper water, it is going to survive here and kind of take this part of the range. Okay, and so we can call this like the fundamental niche, right? The physiological niche. This is what they can do independently, and this is the realized niche. In reality, this is what these species are doing. And so, as you surely learned in your second semester biology class, B&E, or wherever you took your bio class, over time, these interactions can actually shift the fundamental niche through natural selection and ultimately through evolution. And so this could produce more and more distinct characteristics, and again, physiology would adapt accordingly. Species interactions can be classified based on reciprocal effects. That is, based on whether they help the other species or inhibit the other species' success. And so there's a lot of different terms. In general, we can have some blanket terms that are used colloquially, but in ecology, we are going to list them a little bit more specifically. In this lesson, I'm going to talk in detail about a couple of these. So what we have here is essentially the effect on species 1 and the effect on species 2. And so what we can see here is that in mutualistic relationships, so mutualisms, species 1 and species 2 would benefit from the other species being there. Okay, so if you took one of them away, the other species would be hurt. If you add the species, both would actually improve, both would be more successful. So it's called mutualisms. They're mutually beneficial. Parasitism and predation. This is where one species benefits a lot, right? So the predator is going to benefit, whereas the prey is not going to benefit at all. It is going to be hurt by the presence of the predator. And so we're going to see beginning later in this lesson and then in the next lesson how we can actually model these different interactions. We're going to see how, you know, as a predator population increases, maybe the prey population would decrease, and then vice versa, and so on and so forth. So we're going to get that. Competition. This is where, just like we saw on the last slide, the two species are going to compete with each other and therefore have to live in their realized niches as opposed to fundamental niches. And so both species actually are going to be hurt by the presence of the other. Amensalism or amensalism. A essentially means no. And so this is where one species is hurt and the other isn't really affected at all. So for example, a taller tree shades a shorter tree. The taller tree has no idea that the shorter tree is even there. It's not affected whatsoever, but the shorter tree, as we talked about earlier this semester, is very much going to be impacted by the shade of the taller tree. Okay, it's going to be limited in terms of photosynthesis and other resources. Commensalism, this is when one species benefits and the other just isn't affected at all. Okay, so these are actually the 6 that we're going to be talking about in some way or another in over the course of this lesson. Okay. The whole population is ultimately affected by the experiences of the individuals. So 2 individuals mutually benefiting from one another, that and then you add up all of those individual interactions, that is going to determine how the population is going to respond. So this is very similar to what we talked about earlier this term. Natural selection acts on individuals, and in this case, these are natural selection events. But evolution and populations, population ecology, population fate, is determined by the group of individual interactions. Okay. So these species of species interactions can function as agents of natural selection. Okay? Individual is impacted, but the population is going to evolve. Oops, sorry. So what we can see here is the original distribution of seed sizes within a random plant population. So most of them are this size, but then you have some that are a little bit smaller, some that are a little bit larger. Okay, these seeds here, the bigger ones, have a really thick seed coat. They're really big, and they're going to be really difficult for birds to actually break the seed coat. Okay, and so the birds, as a result, this species of bird is going to eat the smaller seeds because they're a lot easier to break down and to actually digest. And so what's going to happen over time is that these smaller seeds are going to be eaten, they're going to be digested, and so they are kind of taken out of the population. Right? So the birds are acting as a natural selection or selective pressure against these smaller seeds, leaving the larger seeds behind and therefore able to grow into the next generation. And so over time, as we know about speciation from our introductory biology courses, this is going to shift the distribution of the seeds, of the sizes of the seeds, towards the larger seeds, the ones that the birds are not eliminating from the population. Okay. Reciprocally, right? So the birds have an effect on the plants, and now the plants, the seeds, are going to have an effect on the birds. And so this is classic Darwin's finches example here. Initially, the bird size, or the beak size of these birds, has a distribution. Most of them are in this range, but there are some that are smaller and there are some that are bigger. And so as the seed size gets larger and larger because of this selection pressure here, only the large-billed birds are going to be able to eat, or they're going to be able to eat the most anyway. So they're going to have the most success, right? So if they're not hungry, they're going to be able to spend their energy on reproduction. Reproduction, leads to more bigger-billed birds in the next generation, and therefore, in future generations, the bill size is going to get larger. Okay, so as we can see, the birds are impacting the plant, and the plant is in turn impacting the bird. And so again, these interspecific interactions are reciprocally, right, in both directions, impacting the niche of both species. Okay, and of course, the characteristics of both species. Okay, and so this is an example of coevolution, two species undergoing change through natural selection. These changes have the ability to thwart adaptive change, right, or magnify adaptive change, right? So either way, evolution is not directional. It is just species interactions kind of driving characteristics in one direction or the other. Okay. Through this co-evolutionary process, what we see develop are classified, or can be classified, as either generalists or specialists. And two different strategies. We see both of these very commonly, but so what that means is that there are advantages and disadvantages to both. Okay, so in this image from your textbook, what we can see is different pollinators, right, and the plants that they pollinate, right, the plants that they are actually getting or benefiting from. Okay, we can see that species like the European honeybee can pollinate, or they can actually benefit from, eat from, any of these different species. And so all 6 of these species, European honeybee can go to, no problem. This bumblebee here also can go to most of these species, and so they would be considered generalists. Okay, so the benefit to being a generalist, of course, is that if for whatever reason, the hummingbird flower was not available, or California milkweed wasn't available, this honeybee could very easily go to another plant, and it wouldn't really be affected at all. Okay, so it can go to more different plants and have that advantage. Specialists, on the other hand, specialize on one or a small few species of plants. So they have very much co-evolved to only interact with a particular species. And so this could involve, the shape of the mouth parts or the mandibles. This can involve, emerging from the larval stage, or emerging from hibernation, maybe only at a particular time. And as a result, only interact, or, emerging when a particular species like the hummingbird flower is most abundant, and therefore you have tons of food, tons of resources available, because you have specialized to only interact with that species. Okay, so generalists and specialists, again, we see both types. Okay, again, most species are generalists, but some are specialists as well. And so to learn a little bit more about specialists, I am giving you guys the opportunity to watch kind of this classic documentary from the 70s. And I know it's super old, but as a biology major, like everybody needs to watch at least part of this documentary. It's called Sexual Encounters of the Floral Kind, which is kind of a play on a 1970s science fiction movie. And so you'll see that this documentary is really dramatic and lots of like intense music and everything. And the language is kind of amusing and dramatic as well. What I would like you to do is watch the first 20 minutes, or if you're enjoying it, the entire 45 or so minutes that it is, and think about how these pollinators are specialists for different plants, and the plants maybe are specialists for, just one particular species of insect or bat or whatever, and think about how these organisms have co-evolved to actually have these interactions. Okay, so thank you guys so much. Make sure to watch the first 20 minutes of this video, which is next in line, next in the playlist, and then come back and I will finish up this lesson for you in my next video. Thanks, guys.